Across from the police station in the Tianjin district of Kaohsiung City, Taiwan, lived a family of five. A 47-year-old man named A Ding and his wife, A Min, had been married for over 20 years. Their eldest son, Ding Taiwen, was in his 20s, along with two other sons and a young daughter. The family mainly subsisted on the sushi shop run by the couple. The hard-working couple's business was flourishing, and they even planned to buy a large refrigerator to better preserve their sushi. Everything seemed to be going well until tragedy struck. In May 2018, police officer Pan Ming Huang from the Tianjin station suddenly realized that A Ding appeared to have vanished. Pan and A Ding had known each other for over a decade. A Ding had always been known for his carefree lifestyle. 3 years earlier, after inheriting a substantial sum of money from his family, he began living extravagantly, frequently visiting entertainment districts, driving luxurious cars, and showing off without any regard for his family. Only when his business ventures failed and he squandered all his money did A Ding truly feel remorse. After that shock, he resolved to rebuild his life, opening a sushi shop and working diligently to support his family. From that point on, his life gradually returned to normal. Over the years, Officer Pan had continuously helped A Ding, showing genuine care for him. When he saw that A Ding had finally reformed and was committed to honest work, Pan felt truly delighted. But now, A Ding had suddenly disappeared, and his sushi shop remained persistently closed, never reopening. A Ding's sushi shop was located directly across from the police station, in a small 4-story building, with the ground floor used as the storefront and the upper floors serving as the family's living quarters. Initially, Pan thought that perhaps A Ding had unexpectedly gone somewhere on business and would return in a few days. Each day, he watched to see if A Ding's shop had reopened. However, a week passed, and the store remained tightly shut. Even knocking on the door yielded no response. To learn about A Ding's situation, Pan called him every day or two. The phone rang, but no one answered. Until one evening, after many rings, someone finally answered. It wasn't A Ding on the other end, but his wife, A Min. Pan got straight to the point, inquiring about A Ding's whereabouts. A Min replied that a few days earlier, A Ding had suddenly said he needed to go to Pingdong to handle something and then disappeared. He hadn't taken his phone, hadn't driven his car, and currently the entire family didn't know where he was. With years of experience in law enforcement, Officer Pan immediately sensed something was wrong. He recalled the last time he saw A Ding. He had enthusiastically shared that the sushi shop was doing increasingly well, planning to expand, and had even bought a new large freezer to preserve ingredients. A Ding was known for diligently managing the store, working every day without rest. Now that the business was just beginning to thrive, how could he suddenly abandon everything to go to Pingdong alone, and without even taking his phone? What could he possibly be doing in an unfamiliar place like Pingdong? Moreover, Pan felt that A Min's attitude was extremely unusual. Her voice on the phone sounded very cold, showing no signs of worry. It seemed that for her husband's disappearance was just a trivial matter. A Ding had been missing for several days, yet A Min hadn't reported it to the police or even tried to find her husband. It was only when Pan proactively contacted her that she reluctantly revealed a bit about the situation. This was truly inexplicable. With a policeman's intuition, Pan had an ominous feeling. If no one knew where A Ding had gone, and his wife, A Min, seemed to be hiding many things, then there was almost only one possibility. A Ding had met with misfortune, and his wife, A Min, was likely the one who knew what happened, perhaps even the perpetrator. The issue was that Pan had known A Ding's family for many years, and he understood better than anyone that A Min was a hard-working and gentle woman. She had a mild temperament, always spoke softly to everyone, and especially loved her 4 children. From any perspective, she didn't appear to be someone capable of committing a crime. In the past, A Ding only knew how to live recklessly, never shouldering the responsibilities of a husband. Their family had survived because of A Min's relentless support. To raise the children, she had run seafood businesses, opened a cold beverage shop, shouldering everything from earning money to caring for the family, enduring tremendous hardship. Without Amin, this family would have fallen apart long ago. How could someone like her possibly become a murderer? Furthermore, Ading had now returned to his family, was always working hard, and life was gradually stabilizing. For Amin, the difficult days had passed. Previously, when her husband was indulging in debauchery outside, she still endured patiently. So why now, when life was getting better, would she suddenly harm her husband? While Pan was still pondering these questions, Amin unexpectedly called him. This call only reinforced the suspicions in the officer's mind. That day, Amin abruptly contacted Pan, informing him that Ading had previously deposited $200,000 with a friend, with an agreement that only he himself could withdraw this money. But currently, the family was in dire need of money, while Ading had disappeared without a trace, and she hoped Pan could stand as a guarantor to help her recover the $200,000 from that friend. This call shocked Pan. Ading had been missing for a long time, his fate unknown, yet what Amin cared about was her husband's deposit. To clarify Ading's whereabouts, Pan went to meet Ading's mother to learn more about the situation. After hearing Ading's mother's account, Pan's suspicions about Amin grew stronger. The reason was very simple. If Ading had truly gone to Pingdong, why would he lie to his own mother? The only explanation was that Ading never went to Pingdong. Pan boldly speculated that if Ading had been murdered, the most likely location was his own home. The perpetrator, of course, was Amin. After harming her husband, she certainly had to dispose of the body. But for Amin, with her small frame, moving the body would be very difficult. Therefore, she could only hide the body at home. Thinking of this, Pan looked at the still tightly closed door of Ading's sushi shop. Was this why the sushi shop never reopened? So how had Amin hidden her husband's body? Ading had been missing for several months now, but neighbors hadn't smelled any unpleasant odors, suggesting the body had been preserved very well. Pan suddenly remembered that Ading had previously mentioned to him about buying a large freezer. He immediately shuddered. While this speculation was logical, it was still just speculation. Without any concrete evidence, how could Amin be made to confess the truth? Pan assessed that Amin had a rather weak character and no criminal record, making her an amateur criminal. If she had indeed committed the crime, she must be under extreme psychological pressure. Just asking direct questions would likely reveal suspicious gaps in her story. With that in mind, Pan arranged to meet Amin at the sushi shop to inquire further about the situation. That evening, the roller door of the shop, which had been tightly closed for 3 months, was finally opened. As soon as he entered, Pan immediately noticed 2 large freezers inside. Amin sat opposite him in the quiet space of the shop, ready to face his questioning. Pan went straight to the point, asking directly about Ading's whereabouts. If Ading is dead, there must be a body or some evidence. If Ading is alive, there must be information about where he is, he said, employing a pre-prepared strategy aimed at presenting the issue while observing the other party's reaction. Amin appeared visibly tense, repeatedly lowering her head to avoid Pan's gaze. The atmosphere in the room quickly became suffocatingly tense. Time seemed to stand still until she suddenly raised her head, her eyes unconsciously turning towards the old freezer. At that moment, Pan grasped everything. He decisively went straight to open the freezer. Inside, he discovered an object resembling a jar, carefully wrapped in layers of material and neatly placed. Upon unwrapping it, a strong stench arose, a mixture of rotten fish and something indescribable. The surface of the container was stained with odor, accompanied by dried bloodstains. Inside were a person's clothes rolled up in a blanket and placed in the freezer. When the evidence was exposed, Amin burst into tears, her heart-wrenching cries echoing in the cold space of the shop. Subsequently, Amin was arrested on charges of intentional homicide. Once in custody, Amin finally confessed the motive behind killing her husband. She stated that throughout their more than 20 years of living together, she had continuously lived under the dark shadow of domestic violence. Ading had a serious violent tendency, frequently treating her like a punching bag, raising his hand to beat her at the slightest displeasure. In fact, from the early days of their marriage, Ding had been physically abusing Min. At that time, she had considered ending the marriage, but because she was pregnant, she couldn't bear to let their child grow up in a broken home. Finally, she decided to endure for the sake of her child. Little did she know that this endurance would stretch over 20 long years. Over the past 20 years, as their children were born one after another, Ding's level of violence also escalated. Every time he returned home, he would find reasons to argue, raising his hand to beat her at the slightest displeasure. Under this constant abuse, Amin's life became darker than death itself. Countless times she wanted to leave, but every time she looked at her 4 young children, she couldn't bring herself to do it. The children became the only motivation for Min to continue existing. She silently bore all the pain, with only the hope of seeing her children grow up in peace. 3 years ago, Ding inherited a huge asset, suddenly becoming wealthy. During this period, the frequency of his domestic violence decreased significantly. However, it wasn't because Ding had reformed, but because he was too busy indulging in a life of luxury and rarely came home. That period became a rare, peaceful memory in Min's life. Previously, Ding had squandered all his money on indulgence, hardly contributing anything to the family. To earn income to support the entire family, Min had opened a cold beverage shop on her own. Under her dedicated management, the business flourished, and the family's living conditions gradually improved. Unfortunately, after Ding spent all his inheritance, he returned to make the family miserable again. He forced Min to sell the beverage shop, using the pretext of wanting money for business. At that time, the shop was operating very well, with daily revenue sufficient to cover the living expenses for the entire family, becoming their main source of income. Min really didn't want to give up her achievements and firmly refused to sell the shop. What awaited her, of course, were cruel beatings from her husband. Each time Min refused, Ding would beat her more violently, until she agreed. Unable to endure further cruelty from her husband, Min finally reluctantly agreed to sell the cold beverage shop. From that moment, the last illusion of her husband in Min's mind completely shattered. She suddenly realized how much suffering she had endured. Since knowing Ding from high school, her life had gradually descended into darkness. It was her own husband, Ding, who had dragged her into this dark abyss with no way out. From that point on, the hatred in her heart grew increasingly unceasing. The night before the incident, Ding returned home drunk and again began to beat and scold Min for trivial matters. He became increasingly violent, and finally, grabbing a sushi knife from the counter, without warning, he swung the blade towards Min. Faced with extreme danger, the survival instinct in Min suddenly erupted fiercely. With unexpected strength, she snatched the knife from her husband's hand and began to counterattack in a frenzied state. She had endured too much, had been patient for over 20 long years, and no longer wanted to continue being a victim. When she finally regained her senses, she was horrified to find her husband collapsed in a pool of blood, no longer breathing. Panicked and not knowing what to do, she placed her husband's body in the freezer to conceal her crime. Min was an incredibly naive criminal. She had heard that if a person goes missing for more than 7 years, they are automatically declared dead. With this simple thinking, she believed that as long as she hid her husband's body in the freezer without anyone finding out, after 7 years, everything would naturally settle down. The problem was that having to live day after day under the same roof with a corpse in the freezer was truly an unbearable psychological burden for Min. Therefore, she closed the sushi shop, thoroughly cleaned the first floor, and moved her children up to live on the second floor. Daily, they only used the back door to enter and leave the house. For the past few months, Min had to convince herself every day, trying not to think about the freezer downstairs as if it never existed. She also understood that this secret couldn't be kept for long, but she truly had no other choice. Now that the matter had been exposed, Min expressed her willingness to face all consequences, only hoping not to affect her children's lives. The suspect had been arrested, the victim's body had been found, and the motive for the murder had been clearly established. This seemed to be a tragic homicide case, a direct result of many years of brutal domestic violence. However, was what Min confessed the whole truth? Was the crime really committed by her alone? Behind the seemingly sincere confession, were there other undisclosed motives? For the investigating agencies, they could only rely on meticulous deductions and verifiable evidence to find answers to these questions. Pan quickly discovered that there were many inexplicable points in Amin's confession. First, Amin was a woman with a small stature. A Ding, though not tall and robust, clearly had an advantage in strength. Yet Amin could snatch the knife from her husband's hand and then end his life. This was hard to imagine. Additionally, of their 4 children, except for the eldest son Tai Wen, who was about to start his own family, the other 3 children were present at home at the time of the incident. So during the violent confrontation between the couple that night, did the 3 children know anything? After being beaten by her husband, then getting the knife and killing him, followed by wrapping the body in a blanket, transporting it to the freezer, and finally erasing all traces at the scene. This entire crime process required a significant amount of strength and physical exertion. From any angle, this was not something that Amin, a woman with a fragile physique, could complete on her own. With these suspicions, Pan began to carefully examine Amin's statement record. He noticed that throughout the process of recounting the incident, Amin repeatedly emphasized, "Only I did it, no one else." This kind of self-incriminating statement sounded extremely forced and unnatural. Amin seemed to be trying to convince the investigators to believe she was the sole perpetrator. Why was she in such a hurry to confess? The only reasonable explanation was that she was trying hard to protect the real culprit. Therefore, the police conducted a sudden second round of interrogation with Amin. They asked a series of detailed questions about the process of killing A Ding. This was an interrogation tactic commonly applied in investigations. When a person repeatedly recounts their actual experience, no matter how many times they tell it, the core content doesn't change significantly. Especially with a major event like killing one's husband, the memory is deeply etched, and every small detail is imprinted in the mind. Conversely, fabricated situations often lack consistency. To make them more plausible, the brain will instinctively adjust and modify details. As expected, Amin continually changed her testimony, with details differing each time. This was enough to prove that her so-called account of killing her husband was entirely fabricated. This meant she never killed A Ding. The perpetrator was someone else. On the day of the incident, those who could have been involved in killing A Ding and making Amin take the blame at all costs could only have been their 4 children. Among them, the most suspicious was clearly Tai Wen, the eldest son, who was also the most mature. Under Pan's persistent and sharp questioning, Amin finally admitted that Tai Wen had helped her handle the body, but still insisted that she was the one who directly killed A Ding. It seemed they had no choice but to find Tai Wen for a detailed interrogation. The police traced Tai Wen to his home and brought him to the station for investigation. When discussing his father, Tai Wen's attitude was identical to his mother's, Amin. Tai Wen shared that, as the eldest child in the family, from a young age, he had always been the main target of his father's violent abuse. Towards this violent father, he had long lost any affection, left only with deep hatred. Under the strong interrogation pressure from the police, Tai Wen finally revealed a second version of the story. Due to enduring continuous domestic violence from his father, Tai Wen had nurtured a growing hatred towards A Ding. That day, when he saw his father with a knife, potentially harming his mother, instinct drove him to help her, and in the effort to protect his mother, he made an irreparable mistake. Tai Wen even showed the investigators a scar on his right hand, explaining that it was an injury caused by his father when he tried to wrestle the knife away. But in this case of a son killing his father, whether it was truly the son trying to take the knife from his father, or the son actively holding the knife to restrain his father, became a critical point for the police to carefully consider. The mother and son thought that just by placing A Ding in the freezer, keeping this secret, they could start life anew. Did you never think that not turning yourself in would make you regret it? Why leave your father's body in the freezer? The investigators questioned. The media extensively reported on the heartbreaking story. A son accidentally killing his father, a mother taking the blame. However, even in this confession, there were still inexplicable contradictions. The police decided to seek concrete evidence from A Ding's body itself. A Ding's body had been in the freezer for 99 days, completely frozen with a blanket wrapped around it. If removed rigidly, vital marks on the body might be damaged. The police had to use a hairdryer to slowly thaw it, carefully bit by bit to remove the body. Finally, A Ding's body was taken to the forensic examination room. After the ice completely thawed, forensic experts immediately conducted an autopsy. A Ding's head had clear marks from being struck with a hard, stick-like object, while his upper body was covered with numerous stab wounds, one of which had severed the main artery in his neck, causing excessive blood loss leading to death. According to Taiwan's testimony, A Ding had been killed accidentally when he wrestled the knife from him. However, if faced with a blade wielded by his own son, by instinct of self-defense, A Ding would certainly have used both hands to block the blow, and his hands should have had wounds caused by the knife. Suspiciously, the wounds on A Ding's body were entirely concentrated on his torso and neck, while his hands had no signs of injury. These wounds indicated that A Ding had been hit with a stick and stunned first, then restrained, and finally stabbed and had his throat cut. Clearly, Taiwan was concealing the truth. This was not an accidental killing, but an action that had been carefully calculated beforehand. So where did the stick wound on A Ding's head come from? No one can simultaneously hold both a knife and a stick to attack. Using two completely different types of weapons simultaneously is truly against common sense. The only logical explanation was that besides Taiwan, there must have been at least one other perpetrator involved in the killing that fateful night. The police took the autopsy results and confronted Taiwan directly. First, this is clearly a premeditated murder, not an accident as you claimed. Second, there must be others involved. Quickly confess who your accomplices are. The police held the actual results in hand, speaking straight to Taiwan. First, this was a case of premeditated murder, not an accidental killing. Second, there must have been other participants, so he should quickly reveal who his accomplices were. Taiwan didn't expect his lie to be exposed so quickly. After a moment of heavy silence, he finally confessed the whole truth. Just as the police suspected, this was indeed a premeditated murder, and to ensure the plan went smoothly, he had hired 2 more people from outside to assist. This revelation completely stunned the investigators. They hadn't expected that at this stage of the investigation, there were still undisclosed accomplices, and there were 2. So who were these mysterious figures, and what was the truth behind the case? Taiwan confessed that due to his father A Ding's frequent abuse of the entire family, and after inheriting a large fortune, not only did he not contribute anything to the family, but he also forced his mother A Min to sell her cold beverage shop. Unable to bear watching his mother and siblings continue to live in abuse from his father, he had nurtured deep hatred and gradually harbored the intention to kill his father. Taiwan didn't have the courage to act alone, so he confided in his mother, A Min. Surprisingly, instead of opposing it, the mother tacitly agreed. The mother and son began to secretly devise a plan to kill the husband, the father. Initially, Taiwan intended to involve his younger brother in the plan, but A Min firmly refused, not wanting the young child to be involved in the crime of murder. She suggested Taiwan find outside help. Taiwan remembered that previously, when his father was still in the seafood business, he had mistreated an employee named Kai Dong-yan, frequently beating him and withholding his wages. Seizing this opportunity, Taiwan approached Dong-yan and aroused the desire for revenge. Without hesitation, Dong-yan happily agreed to participate. Afterwards, Taiwan found another person named Gao Ji-rong to join the murder conspiracy. To dispel all concerns and ensure the complete cooperation of the 2 accomplices, Taiwan promised that after completing the mission, he would pay each person 500,000 new Taiwan dollars, approximately $16,000. On the morning of June 4th, Taiwan decided it was time to act. He carefully instructed his mother, A Min, not to return home to establish a solid alibi. Then, along with his 2 accomplices, armed with sticks and knives, they ambushed at home. As soon as A Ding stepped through the door, all 3 immediately attacked. The victim was knocked down by Dong-yan with a stick, then restrained and pinned to the bed by Taiwan and Ji-rong. Taiwan intended to suffocate his father with a pillow, but due to A Ding's continuous and determined resistance, he was unsuccessful. Finally, he let his two accomplices stab his father to death. After everything was done, Taiwan placed his father's body in the large freezer at home. Min immediately closed the sushi shop and spread false information that her husband had gone to Pingdong and disappeared. Meanwhile, the two accomplices, Dongyan and Ji Rong, quickly vanished without a trace. Hearing Taiwan's confession, the investigators couldn't help but feel confused. Initially, they thought the investigation was nearly complete, with most of the case details even published in the media. Now, with the sudden discovery of two accomplices on the run, they had certainly stirred the snake in the grass. How could they catch those who had been warned in advance? Surprisingly, the arrest of Dongyan and Ji Rong went more smoothly than expected. The police simply followed the household registration information, found Dongyan's home address, and upon arrival, discovered both subjects were present, allowing for their quick apprehension. According to Dongyan's testimony, they had indeed seen the news about the case on TV, but Taiwan had promised to bear all consequences alone. Therefore, they believed the police could never investigate them and had no intention of fleeing. Dongyan admitted that Taiwan had expressed his intention to kill his father many times. Initially, both had advised Taiwan that after all, it was his biological father, and he shouldn't act rashly. However, these two couldn't withstand the temptation of money. Both were drowning in gambling debts. Therefore, when Taiwan offered a payment of 500,000 new Taiwan dollars, approximately $16,000, for participating in the murder, their attitude completely flipped 180 degrees, and both unhesitatingly decided to join the vicious plan. With the successful arrest of Dongyan and Ji Rong, the investigation of the case could finally be concluded. The investigators, after many tense days, could finally breathe a sigh of relief. The court determined that the actions of Taiwan and his mother in bribing others to commit murder had seriously violated the law. However, his crime truly stemmed from years of enduring abuse from his father, A Ding, and after being arrested, Taiwan had actively confessed to all his crimes. These factors could be considered to mitigate his punishment. In the end, Taiwan was convicted of killing a direct blood relative and sentenced to 18 years in prison. Min, although aware of all the details of the murder plan, chose to condone and cover for her son. Considering that she had lived in an environment of prolonged domestic violence, her circumstances were truly pitiful, and she did not directly participate in the act. The court imposed a lighter sentence of 8 years imprisonment. The two accomplices, Dongyan and Ji Rong, were sentenced to 13 years and 15 years in prison respectively. With this, the strange case of murder plotted by mother and son was finally completely closed. Perhaps in this case, only A Min was the most pitiable. She had endured abuse from her husband for 26 years. During these 26 years, she had sought help many times, had reported to the police many times, but each time after reporting to the police, she only received more brutal beatings from her husband. A Ding would just force a smile, lie, and see the police out the door. When the door closed, Min would fall into an even more terrifying abyss than before. In the end, she didn't kill A Ding with her own hands. Perhaps this was the last kindness she showed to the husband who had abused her for 26 years. During sleepless nights in prison, A Min behind bars might ask herself this: was it the violent husband who released the devil within her, or had she been living in hell all along? And that is today's case. What are your thoughts on this case? Please share in the comments below. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video.